talk's going to be about using Glass.Mapper with Sitecore MVC and looking at how we can convert from, sort of maybe looking at how it compares to WebForms in certain areas, and then looking at some more advanced features. How many people are you already using Glass in their solutions? Excellent. Okay. And hopefully we'll convert everyone else who's not. Who's using some sort of other ORM or wrapping framework? Cool. Excellent. Well, at least most people are doing something, which is good to see. Cool. Right, so throughout my presentation, we have to wait a few seconds. Come on. There we go. So throughout this, each slide's got a serving suggestion. So if you're watching this later, you can buy these, drink them as you go through. So the first thing we're going to look at, when it comes up, is the main difference between WebForms and MVC. And this is really laggy. There we go, gets there eventually. Who said technology is great? So the main difference, obviously, with Glass, when you go into MVC in terms of the rendering part, is you go from the % equals to the @ symbol. It's that simple, basically, because the API is the same thing. So unlike if you're going from native WebForms with Sitecore to native MVC, you know, there's a whole syntax change. You've got @html.sitecore.blah, blah, blah, or you're using the item controllers, the SC rendering fields and stuff like that. With Glass.Mapper, there's none of that. You can literally just copy and paste your code across, do a find and replace, and it will just work again pretty much in the same way. You know, so you get a lot of reusability. There's no relearning of anything, just to use it with Sitecore MVC. So, as we said before, you know, in WebForms you had a user control. Now we're going to go to a controller, but it's pretty much the same thing. You know, there's a Glass controller, but the Glass controller itself actually exposes interfaces, so you can cool down. So if you're going to be doing unit testing with the Glass controller, you would expose this constructor on your controller so that you can then inject them to do your unit testing correctly. But obviously you don't have to do that. You can just skip this Glass controller part and do it all manually if you wanted to. Also on the controller, which is very popular with people, is getting the rendering parameters. How many people knew that Glass will support strongly typed rendering parameters? Have you seen that? One. All right, cool. Well, it does. So the way we do that is actually quite clever. We look at your rendering parameters, which are stored as a URL encoded string. We break that string up. We create a fake Sitecore item, and then we shove that fake Sitecore item through the Glass pipelines again to actually create the object. And then you get a strongly typed model. And that can work with links. So if you've got in your rendering parameters, you know, you've got a drop down that points off at another item in Sitecore, that will still work because it all goes through the same pipelines. It will decode the GUIDs and get you the right items. And then also we have get controller item, which does the same sort of logic as the data source item. You know, it checks that the data source on the controller rendering, and then it pulls out that item if it's set, or it just gets you the context item if that's not set. So ideally, you probably want to go through get controller item. Okay, so first thing we're going to look at is view renderings. So the view rendering is what we saw in Ruth's demonstration, is where we don't actually have a controller building our model or anything like that. We're just going to have the model automatically mapped by the render model pipeline, I think it's called, or get model pipeline, which is there. So it's just a process that we've added in. You specify where your CSHTML is, and then you say which model you want to use with that CSHTML. Is everyone familiar with this? Does anybody have any suggestions on how I can get rid of that? Because so this bit here defines the model that I want to use in this view. But this view knows which model it wants to use. So what I really want to do is go, just look at that. But I'm struggling to find a way of getting that from that at the moment.
Actually, I look at the data source that's used in the view. You can set a data source and a template for the data source. And then
That's all right.
resolves that as a model. So you don't have to fill that field.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Not going to try that.
Yeah, because I hate having to copy and paste this, and then you update this, and then you forget about that, and then you get a yellow screen of death, and it's pretty obvious when it goes wrong, but it's just a pain. You just want to get rid of anything like this anyway. But view renderings are very simple. So if we look at the first one, so if I open my solution. So originally I had this all working brilliantly, it was all set up, but then we had all these problems, and now everything's not open properly. Okay. So I put everything in views, and this is my page title one. And you can see there I'm just mapping an interface. I can get the rendering parameters if I want to actually within the CS/HTML page as well. So get rendering parameters comes out is this strongly typed thing. It's probably, is it too small for the guys at the back? Yeah. How's that? Better? Cool. It's now readable. So we've got the glass view, which your CS/HTML pages should inherit from, because that will give you access to the editable methods. And also, as I was saying before, you can get rendering parameters. I'm getting that as this strongly typed page titles object. And then I'm doing here, I know, does it have a long, where we go? Here, do we have a subtitle? And we're checking rendering parameters to see if the subtitle should actually be rendered at all. So CHTML pages I think are quite useful because they're very simple to get set up straight away. You can put a lot of the logic on in terms of rendering into your model. You don't have to do it in the controller then. So if you're doing like a standard Sitecore MVC solution, one of the things you're probably going to end up doing is having to have a controller just to build up the view model, because you need to pull these items from different places. Whereas with the Glass solution using the CS/HTML, we can make the model be very descriptive about where everything is, and then just use a CS/HTML page. We don't need the intermediary controller doing the data model design for us, as it were. We can just stick with this. Okay. Should we go on? So hopefully it's going to catch up in a second. Okay, so within the CS/HTML, and this applies to both controllers and to the standard CS/HTML render one, we can still do rendering images using the editable field. We also have support for the using statement. This is really useful if you want to render content within Sitecore links. You've got a general link field. If you want to put an image in there or something else like that, use the using statement, wrap it in that general link field using the begin render link. And then even in the page editor, that still works. So we can have an editable link with an editable image, all working in the page editor nice and cleanly with a proper model. I don't know if many people know this, but these Lambda expressions will be executed properly. So if you've got a complex model, you can drill down and make them editable. So you can see here, this is actually using the home item here is actually on another model. And this other model, this X item here, can be anything. So this could be if we're using the MVVM pattern or something like that, this model can be whatever you want it to be part of your view model. And then you have your data model, and then we have the field we want to use. But that executes fine, because Glass will just execute this first section and then decide which field it's going to try and render on. Cool. So in this one, we can see there we've got an example of doing the link being wrapped, making content editable, so I've got a name and an image editable here. Also notice that we support anonymous parameters now. That was quite a high request for people because beforehand we had this weird name value collection thing, and that was just really verbose and it caused a lot of text to have to be written out. But yeah, these will translate into proper parameters as well on your image URLs and stuff like that. So they do get passed back to the Sitecore server, and then those images will be properly scaled and cached by the Sitecore server. So if we have a look at that in the page. So this is my demo site that I've done up. You can see it's got all the important things that are, as you can't see it now, but this pulls for a dramatic effect. Right. So we have like bacon, beer, cats and donuts. It's pretty much a standard office, I think, for developers these days. And so if we click through, we can see these images here act as links. Here is awesome. But if we go into the page editor mode, he says, how many people are using the page editor with Glass, or are you just using it purely as a data backend? So I have to go this way because my Signal node isn't my default node. And so you can see there I've got my images still editable, but within inside the link. No, these things are all still editable. So I haven't lost anything because I've wrapped them within the link itself. And this is actually a feature control, so it's not truly what I was representing before, but everything still works. We haven't compromised anything by going to a full data model. But with those of you who perhaps haven't seen Glass before, the important thing is that we're not, in the back end, that we haven't compromised our data model. It's still a plain old C# object. We haven't got any items being handled or carried around in the background. So we get full testability, but still get full control over the page editor, page designer. Because that was a key thing. If you're going to do anything, you don't want to compromise the things that you've paid the money for. You know. Cool. So I'm going to come back to talking about controllers. This one here makes the assumption that you're not inheriting from the Glass controller. So you're going to just have your own standard MVC controller out of the box. And what I normally would do is I have this iSitecore context service, and this is my reading service. And then if I ever need to write anything back, because obviously I've got to go back to the master database, I'll use the iSitecore service to differentiate between where I'm reading from and where I'm writing to. So this will always point to master. Now there is some discussion about, should your CDNs, or your content delivery service, CDSs, have the master database connection string in there? Should it be removed? But that's another religious debate for maybe tomorrow for those who are sticking around. The hackathon's been cancelled, so maybe we can all sit around in a pub and argue that question for a few hours. But I normally do it this way. If I have to write data back, I'll do it this way. I have my context being my web and my master being the place I'm going to write to. And then what you can do is you can set the controller factory to be the actual Windsor container that comes out of Glass. So that then I can just pump my comments controller into my Windsor container, and then Sitecore will then use the DI, as we talked about in the previous presentation, to create these controllers and then inject these two here. Obviously, you don't have to use Windsor. If you want to use AutoFac or Ninject or Simple IOC, there is a blog post that explains how you can make that work with Glass. And it's very simple. I mean, what you can mostly do is just say, right, Glass is going to be using Castle Windsor. I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave it using Castle. and just assume it's part of that framework. And then I'm going to use simple inject or something else over here, and I'm just going to pass it in these two, and then they will all instantiate correctly, and they'll just play nicely together. I think we had on one project a record of 4 different IOC containers. It wasn't deliberate, but it got to that point. And then we didn't tell the client about the 5th one that we'd hidden somewhere. So going IOC crazy. But if we actually look at that in a real life scenario. So I have my comments controller here. And so you can see, excellent. We see it now. I'm passing them into the constructor. It's all good IOC implementations should do. And then coming down, one of the things which is kind of quite cool with Glass, let's look at this one, current item. Actually, I want to be in, that's the right one. You know when you get halfway through and you're like, I'm a bit lost. Cool. Okay, actually in this one, I'm kind of cheating, unfortunately, and I hadn't done what I was hoping to do, which makes this demo a bit harder. But one thing you can do is when you read from the context, I'm getting the current item in here from the context, so that's the page that somebody's on and commenting about. I can map the new item straight onto the form, but I don't actually have to use context here. I could actually say that's master. Because Glass has disconnected the item from the database, you can pull from one database and push it into another database because there's no internal connection, which is something you can't actually do with the native Sitecore API. You know, if you get an item out of master, that item's got to be pushed back into master and say straight back to master. But not with Glass. Pull from web, push to master, doesn't matter. Push to core. I don't know, you push it any way you want. It may blow up, but just have a play. One other thing to notice on this, once it scrolls up, is this method is using the model binding that comes out of MVC to map a form to this model. And that's one of the nice things. You want to be able to make use of the automatic model binding, as you can see here. So we're coming in, somebody's posted back their comment, we come in, we grab the form that was on the original view model. So I'm using kind of like an MVVM solution again here. This is my view model. My view model has a form on it. So somebody fills out that form. I grab that form they filled out. But notice I'm not doing any other mapping code really. I'm giving the form, the item a name. But as you'll see in a minute, the user's name, message, and email address, they're not being manipulated in here. I just take that form and I pump it straight into Sitecore because the model mapping's already done. The MVC solution has done the model binding for me, so I don't actually have to put any mapping code into here, but I can still push things straight into Sitecore. Now, if you imagine trying to do that with your standard, the standard Sitecore API, you're going to have your form coming in, and then you're going to have your item there, and then you're going to be like, all right, map that into that field, map that into that field, map into that field. It gets rather tedious, and you just don't want to be doing that. It's all right if you've got 3 or 4 fields, but if you've got 20 fields on a form, it's just a bit tedious. So if we see this in action, let's sign out of. So there was a video here of cats fighting with lightsabers. It's a really good video actually if you ever get a chance to watch it. I won't do it on this because it's going to rinse the data connection over this mobile device, but it's great fun. So let's pick on somebody, Karen. Karen's always saying this. So, yeah, so some of you can't see that, unfortunately. But hopefully Kern can see it and he'll buy me. So it says, Kern thinks glass is awesome and people should buy me beer. He's offered to buy me one later, haven't you, Kern? So we submit that, but all those fields, they're just going straight into Sitecore, and we're not doing any mapping here. We're just like, right, I've created my form, I've created my model, I'm going to pump that straight into Sitecore. I'm not doing any manipulation in the middle. The other thing you can do with model binding as well is because we're dealing with directly with the comment form and MVC model binding, is we can also put a model validation onto here without any issue. In here, we're actually going to be also putting in the indexing from Sitecore Search. So on one model, we can then define lots of different things. We can define where it comes from the Sitecore data API. We can define where it comes from the Sitecore Search data API. We can put MVC validation on. We get model binding. We get all this good stuff because we haven't got all the other problems in the background. They've all been abstracted away from us. So I haven't put any validation on here because I was a lazy programmer. And I just want gumph in my system. But also because, again, we're dealing with plain old POCs, plain C# objects, sorry. We can also do JSON serialization straight from your models. So from here, I'm going into the Sitecore Search API. There's this .map method. Who's used the .map method with the Sitecore Search? No? People know what it is? Blank faces, so I'll explain what this does. So the idea between the .map method is you've got items in your Sitecore Search, and you pull them out of Sitecore Search, but obviously not all your data is in there. So say you've got search items and you want images with those search items, or there's rich text fields and things like that. All that rich data, that's actually still sat in Sitecore. So what you do is you pull that out of Sitecore Search, and it has the ID in the language, and that's great. And then you pass the concrete object from Sitecore Search into the map method. And the map method goes, right, I can see you've got an ID there, you've still got the language there, right, I'll go and get you the rest of your field data. So in this way, you can then fully hydrate the rest of your model from your Sitecore data source. So you can use the search to quickly get the stuff, pass it to map, I'll get the rest of my item information, and then I'll return it. And in this case, we're going to return it as a JSON object. So we can pump that straight back out to everyone. Again, no, there's no mapping here. This is purely business logic. All that boilerplate code, that's all gone away. It's all just hidden by our data model. And so we can, in our demo solution then, I can use that to do sort of on-the-fly searching. So if we can back it up. I can't see the screen, but if I type in Kern, you can see that this is going to be at the bottom there. If I type things in, it will sort of rationalize what I can see slowly. And it's really frustrating that I'm having to demo this way because it works a lot better. But this is all being pumped out by JSON, so I can use everything with JavaScript, and I can get that responsiveness that I want from my JavaScript solution, but without having to do too much coding. Okay, of course, Glass does work with partials as well. So you don't have to put everything in your top layer CS/HTML page. You just call your partials in the same way. Pass down the child view model again as you would normally. And then again inherit from the Glass view. So make sure your parcels inherit from Glass view, but then you can still use the editable functions and stuff like that. Glass isn't getting in the way of this basic function. So on to the biggie, which is unit testing, because one of the main reasons people want to go to an MVC solution is they want to start using features like unit testing, trying to break things out, dependency injection, that sort of stuff. So I use substitute for mocking. You could use MOQ or anything like that. But you can just map the iCycle context. Relatively simple. You saw earlier, we specified the iCycle service and iCycle context on the controller, so we just pass those in. And because we're using just plain old C# objects, again, we just do a new, and we just say, right, get item when I have an ID. And actually in this place, I don't really care what the item ID is, because I'm not testing, do I know my IDs? I'm testing my business logic. So I just say, any random ID. If I were you, I'd recommend, when you write your test, to probably use this new GUID. The reason I say that is because it makes sure that no developer has hard-coded an ID somewhere within the business logic. Because if this is random, then they can't do anything like, I'm going to statically define some method call to get that item. Keeps them guessing, I guess. Keeps them on their toes. So I say, right, it returns this item. This service will save this item. This actual call here is nothing. And then we can just act out, call our method, and get the result back and check it. So it's a very nice, clean solution, clean unit test. Very easy to set up, as opposed to some of the other solutions that might be out there. Because it's all just plain old C#. We've completely removed the sort of Sitecore element of this, which is probably sounds a bit odd at a Sitecore event to say, tried to get rid of Sitecore as much as possible from this area of code anyway. Cool. So again, back to if you are inheriting from the Glass controller and you want to carry out unit testing, just remember to pass down these services to the base context so that the base context can actually be tested correctly. Otherwise, you'll probably just get a null reference exception being thrown at some point and you'll be wondering why. Also notice that you can pass into the Glass HTML context as well, so if you have some logic that requires checks on editable and stuff like that, you can still pass that in. Glass HTML as well is also interfaced. So if you want to do some testing on are things being made editable correctly and stuff like that, you can do. Probably wouldn't suggest it because you're really not testing your business logic then, you're more testing the rendering engine. And to be honest, if you're in a controller and you're referencing Glass HTML, then you've probably started to confuse your concerns. It's there because in case people want it, but I would recommend that you probably don't want to confuse your concerns like that. Okay. So my first set of bullet points. Many people may not have heard this project, but it's a smaller project that goes along with Glass, which is the Mapper, the Razor solution. How many people have heard of it? How many people have used it? One, cool. How many people are still using it? 0, right. Yeah, there's not a lot of documentation on this, unfortunately. And I should work to improve that. But the Glass Razor project was started before MVC came along. And it grew out of my initial attempts. First off was to use the Spark framework, Spark engine, Vue engine. People heard of that one? A few people nodding. Spark came before Razor was even on the scene. And it was a Razor-esque kind of solution, but it didn't have the IDE support that Razor eventually got. But it allowed you to do rendering without having to do user controls and all the WebForms rubbish that goes along with that. So it's very nice because you could get rid of view state but still render out stuff. It still worked with Sitecore really well because it was basically a user control behind the scenes, but without most of the page lifecycle stuff in there. So then Razor came out, and somebody quickly created an open source version of the Razor engine from the MVC just to do the Razor rendering part, because they could see the value in just having the Razor engine on its own. And so I took that and leveraged it so that I could put those Razor views into Sitecore. So what that means is you can have a Razor view but on your WebForms side, which is quite nice. You get all the, you still get the support of all the syntax highlighting, IntelliSense, as you do with the MVC solution, but it just works in the WebForms. Also, more importantly, it works in MVC. So if you create a Glass Razor view they now span both. So if you look at my website here, where it changes, this top line where it says Glass.Mapper MVC, that is based on Razor, and it works. I've got that on my WebForms page, and I've got that on my MVC page, because I don't have to write that twice. That's just a pain in the backside to do twice. And then maintain and remember that I've got to update both sites. So in Sitecore, it comes, it's defined under the layout section, and you get the same support for caching. So, because actually Sitecore does that afterwards, so that's quite nice. You just get that out of the box for free, really. There's several different types. You have what we call a typed template, which is pretty much like a controller rendering. You just define at the top what type you want this view to be, and you can then just render the model out. You get a code behind version, which is more in common with the user control. So that's when you want to use your business logic layer. And then there's also dynamic rendering as well, which uses the dynamic keyword. With a dynamic keyword in .NET. Cool, most people. How many people have used it? Cool. For those who are not familiar with the dynamic keyword, it's bringing this idea of dynamic objects like you have in JavaScript, where you don't really know the type, but you can just do myObject.title. Title may not even be a property, you don't know until runtime, but .NET will try and work that out for you at runtime if that thing actually exists on the object. Obviously, the dynamic typing has all the problems you'd expect with dynamic typing. So those of you who've worked in JavaScript or PHP, you know that sometimes the property you thought was there is no longer there when it comes to runtime, because you have no compile time checks. But it can be a very useful solution if you're wanting to quickly mock things up. Because sometimes you might not want to go to the full trouble of having to write an object model, even though it may only be 3 or 4 lines of code. You just want to quickly mock something out. So with a dynamic keyword in Glass, you can just say my item dot page title, and it will try and render out the page title field for you. If you do my item dot page title dot editable, it then makes it editable as well. So there is quite a lot of support there if you want to use dynamic items as well. But as I say, caveat it. You get no compile time checks. So if somebody changes a field name or changes something else for some reason, it will blow up. So this is, as you can see, this is an example of one of these type templates. And if it pretty much looks the same as your CSHTML page would look like for MVC. The only difference is we have a different base class to inherit from, which is this typed template. Pretty much everything else then is the same. So you can just copy and paste from one to the other. So if you did want to shift, and you already had things written in MVC, it's not an issue. You just Control-C, Control-V, and copy and paste it. Again, we still have the support for things like rendering images. It supports page editor, links, all those sorts of things. So I think it's quite a useful tool to have there when you're trying to bridge that gap between MVC and WebForms. On that point as well, I'd also say, look at how Sitecore does do its rendering engines and think about how you can also extend them with your own custom rendering engine. Because that's actually quite a powerful thing, and I don't think many people realize that actually you can prise off that lid and get in there and render things the way you want to render them. You're not strictly limited to WebForms, MVC. Maybe you could come up with just a purely JSON rendering system, which would be quite cool. Okay. So as I said, there are 3 different types. We have the typed, behind, and dynamic. One thing to take note of is the fact that they aren't, although they're CSHTML pages, they're not compatible with MVC in the sense that I can't call them as a partial. So they have to be defined in the presentation layer of your item. They can't be called from somewhere within the MVC actual framework itself on an MVC page. And they're not compatible with controllers. So if you have a controller that returns a view rendering, a view action, then you can't pass it a view that's been created by the Glass.Razor project. Because, as you saw, the inherited type is different. They come from very different DLLs, and it will just blow up. Cool. Okay, that was a whistle-top tour. Sorry that it hasn't been as smooth as I'd hoped it to be, because we've got two systems and all a bit of a mad panic at the start, really. On the plus side, it has meant that I now need to buy a new laptop, so I have an excuse to... the Surface 3 got released, and I was looking at it, and it's like 1,300 quid, and I'm trying to justify it, but no, that's just another another tick. But yeah, if you've got any questions or you want to see anything I've talked about, like dynamic items or how Razor works in more detail or anything like that, come and grab me. Bring one of those, preferably. Though after last night, maybe not. It was a sort of late night. And of course, we should just say thanks to all the sponsors who have made this event possible. And thank you for listening. Is there any questions? Okay, if there's no questions, then thanks, and I'll let you go and get the coffee early.